Hi, everyone. This is a few of us from the Human Animal Spiritual Network. And today we want to talk about boundaries and the importance of creating boundaries for ourselves. So we're just going to have a conversation about that. And here we go. Angela would like to start. So here you are.
Hi everyone. Um, I guess in my life, the most important thing that I learned is I didn't even know what my boundaries were. So I would walk around and maybe feel hurt by other people and wouldn't communicate why or what they had done to hurt me. I went into potentially resentment instead of communication. When I finally understood what it was going on, that I had had potentially someone cross my boundaries, I identified, oh, now this hurts, and I understand why, because I asked that person not to physically move me from a position, say if I was in a workplace, or I asked someone not to call me after 9 o'clock on a Tuesday when I had designated time set away. So once I understood what my boundaries were or what I wanted and what I didn't want, I felt more clear about communicating in the future to those people what they were. So I just thought I'd start out by saying that because a lot of us walk around and potentially we haven't formulated what we do and do want. And I think that's a helpful thing to have designated and cleared up within ourselves. That's all.
Next.
How
I,
can I don't know.
yeah, I just want to say something briefly about the boundaries, and I totally agree that sometimes we don't even know, but sometimes even when we do know, it becomes difficult for us to carry that through and to really live by, I'm going to not this person, I'm going to stop at 5 o'clock, and I find in my own practice that sometimes it's difficult to keep that boundary, that structure, and but I think being aware of knowing when it's crossed is really the first step. And then sometimes when it is crossed, say, well, in this particular case, it's okay. And in the end of the day, I think the boundary is really about self-respect on some level. Um, and respect of my time, and that that kind of circles back to self-esteem, to self-care, to self, how do I care for myself? And then what I've seen that is when I really do that, then people have a different perspective and view because how I feel about myself gets reflected outward.
And what I was going to say, hi, I'm Jeff Feynman, and I've been a clinical vet for 39 years, and I was in practice without boundaries for
Mhm.
many, many years, and that created a lot of burnout, a lot of compassion fatigue, a lot of stress. And as I began to recognize that boundaries were necessary for me to be able to be more of a compassionate, connected person, I realized the importance. That's when, very late in life, I discovered how important the boundaries are. And you're able to be connected while having boundaries. And the more that you can practice self-care and self-compassion, stronger your boundaries are, but the more connected you can be. That's really all I wanted to say.
I'd like to come from a bit of a different angle since we are a spiritual group here. And what I've learned is the importance of having boundaries so that I'm not taking on the emotions of everybody around me, both the animals and the people. And I've come to realize that as I was going through veterinary school and a residency, that I was exhausted all the time And even after, when I'm working with animals, it's really important to take care of myself and do some kind of protection. We can talk about that at another point, but just creating a bubble around myself, bubble of light, and asking for help from the my inner guidance team, just to keep me safe and only allowing love into my field rather than taking on the emotions of everyone else. And when I'm done with a session with an animal, I just do a clearing. I just move my hands over my body to release any energy that's not my own and ask for help to stay in my own energy field. And that's been really important for me.
Mm. That's beautiful. I think I might be able to go next because what you're saying, I completely resonate with. As people who are, we were veterinarians, but then went into, in my case, full-time animal advocacy, promoting, being the voice for the voiceless. And I didn't even think about my own boundaries. I thought my job was to be completely out there for those I was taking care of or defending, and almost too much in, you got to get it done, you got to get out there, you got to get this done, you got to be the voice, never enough. And I finally found, as Barbara said, just overwhelm. There was a time when I really couldn't take it anymore. I was slammed in the face with, this isn't working. COVID was a blessing in disguise for me in that way because I had to stop. But as someone who's an empath, and I think so many of us who are highly sensitive, caring, loving people, we tend to put ourselves out there so much, we think our boundaries are not as important. And very quickly, I'll say I'm a slow learner because I could develop boundaries in my work, but in my personal life, I couldn't develop boundaries. And this is something that's even as important. And it's a hilarious situation in retrospect, but at the time it was terrifying. I had a neighbor who completely took over my property to my house and actually put a fence up attached to my house. I couldn't even access the side of my house. Who does this? And I let it happen. And it took me a year to learn, and I learned it. I finally learned this lesson that you need to not only defend yourself spiritually, emotionally, but you need to protect your personal space from people who you think people are ready to do the right thing. Not necessarily so. It was a very, very difficult lesson to learn. And I lost sleep over the fear of having to stand up for myself. But I did it. I persevered. And I was shocked at how difficult it was for me and how much I needed to learn this. So I just wanted to share that because it was not pleasant, but it was one of the most valuable lessons I have ever learned. So I hope that might be helpful to somebody. It helped me physically, emotionally, and spiritually.
Thank you. Good lesson. Anybody else want to share anything?
Yeah, I can share. That's all right. So I'm Elena Manis. I'm not a vet, haven't been. I'm a documentary filmmaker and author, and I have led a professional life that's stressful and brought up a lot of fear and anxiety and chaos, really. And in my journey, which through animals has become a kind of spiritual journey, I believe that setting boundaries is both internal, I mean, maybe primarily internal, to set boundaries in my own consciousness and behavior and emotions and become less reactive to what other people think of me, which I think is very important in setting boundaries, and less reactive, and to not obsess about where other people are coming from, which in truth has nothing to do with me, which was it's a hard lesson to learn, which I perhaps haven't learned totally to date, but I work on it a lot, and my animals have helped with that. For example, I have a quite reactive youngish standard poodle, and I live in an apartment building. He is not perfect, despite a lot of training. He still likes to jump on people. He's very friendly. He's not aggressive, but it's a challenge in a busy building with many dogs. And in the beginning, I was very sensitive to other people's what I perceived as negative opinions. Well, I think they were, even are, negative opinions often. But it doesn't help me and it doesn't help him if I react to that and become more nervous and more tense, which I can do very easily. So I really work on setting that boundary within myself. And I have seen some improvement in him. So I hope that it's maybe helping him to set boundaries also. So that's what I'd like to share.
Just like to add, Elena had said a very important comment when she was talking about boundaries. And that is where this thought of you have to understand where you start and the other one begins, and really identify what your values are, what your truths are, and not allow that to blur into what someone else thinks. And I think that's such an important point, because when we start getting wrapped up with what other people are thinking, then we get lost. And especially with empaths, we tend to really reflect how we're feeling on other people. So something that I've learned with boundaries is bringing myself back, because often my energy will stray outwards as I'm trying to feel or see where another person is. I'll forget about myself. So one of the practices that I've had to remind myself throughout the day is bring myself back. And I'll do it in different ways. Sometimes if I'm in the grocery store, it will be more energetic, and I'll bring myself back by just tuning in and realizing I'm straying. So I'll pull myself back, and then I'll turn my energy centers down, each chakra down a bit, because I find that I'm straying out to connect with other people's energies, which is unconscious. But on a more physical level or a non-energetic level, is if someone, Elena said that too, and it's so important, is not take something personally. So if you aren't straying out energetically, but you are in dealing with someone one-on-one, is to stop and go, oh, okay, that's theirs. And that's okay if they have that opinion or value that's different than mine, and to pull back and remind yourself that that's okay, because you're a different person. And so a part of boundaries is realizing that we are different, and connecting with ourselves more than connecting with that other person.
That's great. And another thing came up for me with what Elena said is that our own emotions, our emotional reality is reflected in our pets and our animals. So that if I'm really, really stressed and upset and angry, guess what? So's my dog or cat or horse going to be as well. So I think part of setting boundaries is to monitor our own reactions, and and like you said, don't project those onto somebody or something else, and just take responsibility for what we're feeling, and do some of these techniques to calm ourselves and come back to center.
I think I can add a few thoughts to that. As again, I so relate to that empath, that highly sensitive person. And I know what I tend to do. I'm better now, but what I used to do without even thinking about it was take on the energy of the people that were around me. And I now am able to say, for example, if I'm in a stressful situation or an angry person or whatever it is, I can pause and think, because I practiced it, and practice is so important. I can say, let's pause for a minute here. Now, I'm getting upset. Is this my emotion, or is this the person I'm interacting with? Is this my energy or their energy? Remember, we are all energy and information. And some of us just absorb what is going on around us. And we have to take that moment to practice to say, wait, this isn't me, and release it. And again, there are techniques we can do, breathing, taking a moment, becoming calm. And one thing that works for me too is to try to go into a presence in myself for a moment and say, wait a minute, I'm observing this. Let's be the observer. I'm observing what's happening. I don't have to be in it full force. And it's a protective way of maintaining our space. And it also helps us to be better responders to whatever's going on, as opposed to knee-jerk reacting. Sometimes highly sensitive people can take it and take it and take it, and then all of a sudden something happens and we blow up. Not good. So again, it's keeping that balance, maintaining our own personal balance and space. And the other thing I wanted to say is just remember, don't take criticism personally. I know we all get caught up in that, but I learned from a very, very wonderful teacher once who said, never take criticism personally. Listen to it. Take what truth is in it and leave the rest. And the other thing I wanted to say is, what someone else thinks of me is none of my business. So, hope that's helpful. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you. Okay. Anything else?
I just wanted to add one thought, actually, that Angela brought up. And I think Linda enlarged the concept, but that is a really important boundary that I had never thought of. But that's the boundary between my head and my body.
Yeah.
And it's my thoughts about what others are going to think or what's going to happen in the future. And those are things I don't want to be affecting my nervous system. And all the actions that Linda is referring to, whether it's conscious breathing, whether it's coming to your senses and just feeling and looking and smelling, those things are going to help me respect that boundary by getting me out of my head into my body. And thank you. Thank you all.
I will just comment on one last, sentence or two, in that sometimes when it feels like a boundary is being crossed, there's a fine line between having an emotional past trauma be triggered versus having a boundary be crossed. And I think for myself, I will speak, when that occurs, the first question I ask myself is, what is being triggered within me by this person? And so maybe it isn't a boundary that's being crossed. Maybe it's an old trauma that's being triggered and coming up for me to take a look at. So, in my healing world, in my process, I really first take a personal inventory of what's happening, and then possibly act or respond in a way that I'm aware of what's happening. So, thanks.
Something keeps coming up for me, and I'm not sure that this even relates to boundaries, but it probably does. I just got back from going to Jane Goodall's 90th birthday celebration.
Oh, how nice.
Oh, lucky you.
And what it reminded me of is many years ago, I met Jane when I was doing a residency in non-domestic animal medicine at UC Davis. And she came to speak, and I met her, and I was so excited. She was my hero. And I said, I'm a veterinarian, and I'm working at the Primate Center for a month during my residency, and I want to go to Africa, and blah, 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 blah. I was all excited. And instead of saying, oh, that's wonderful, she said, well, veterinarians are some of the worst. And I went, what? She said, because they do these things that are completely unethical, but they just support it and go along with it. And I realized that I had been working with these monkeys in cages who are being used for research, and it was absolutely atrocious. But because I was so committed to learning medicine and working with these kind of animals, I just completely ignored my own feelings. And when she said that, it just woke something up in me that was so deep, and it stayed with me all these years. And I think it's about acknowledging our true feelings, like Jeff was saying, that the distinction between the head and the heart. And when we suppress these things, it can take a real serious toll on us, emotionally and physically. So I just wanted to bring that up, that when we're doing something, just to be really cognizant of what's really true for us and not try and stuff all this stuff. So there, anyone else?
Barbara, I think that's a really important story that you just brought up because it goes hand in hand with don't take criticism personally. Take what the truth is of what was said. And that's exactly what you did, because if your ego had taken over and you had a knee-jerk reaction, it could have been, oh, well, who does she think she is? I'm a vet and so I think that wisdom to really hear the truth of what was being said. I mean, and it completely changed you. So I think that's a beautiful example. Thank you for sharing
I
that.
will say, Linda, I wasn't as great as all that, because the next night she was speaking again, and I went up and I talked to her and I said, not all veterinarians are bad.
Well, and maybe she needed to hear that as well.
I
So,
said, I'm sorry, I might have been a little extreme, but nevertheless, it had a huge impact.
yeah.
So thank you.
Thank
Okay, thank you, everyone.
Right.
And
Thanks. Thank you.